to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in the eve of a momentous event here in Berkeley, California. And I'm not talking about the election, but as always, I'm joined by
Bob Bazeko in Houston, Texas. And we are joined by our very frequent collaborator and good friend, Clayton Lust. He's also in Houston. Clayton is a professor in Houston and an all-around good guy. So today we're going to be talking about Yankee imperialism, which you would think, oh, you guys talk about that all the time, but it's a different kind of Yankee imperialism. Tomorrow night, the World Series opens, and what is Major League Baseball executives and TV executives' fantasy matchup? It's the Yankees and the Dodgers, the East Coast versus the left coast, New York versus LA. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that, but obviously this is the Green and Red podcast where we talk about politics and the economy and things like that. So what we want to do is talk about the economics of baseball, which is really fascinating. And I think it's a good template for the way the economy actually works. I've actually written about this a little bit before. So if you want to start, and when I teach, I often use examples like from the sports world to describe the way the economy works. So we're going to try to do that, have some fun about it. In the obviously, you've seen, I am a Yankee fan. People often say, how can you be a Yankee fan? You're a lefty. The great lefty historian, William Allen Williams, was an avid Green Bay Packer fan in their glory days. And people used to say, how can you like Lombardi and the Packers? They're fascists, they're reactionaries. And this story comes from Lloyd Gardner, another great historian. And Williams would look at them and say, Lombardi understands power. And the Steinbrenners understand power. So I am a wanting Yankee.
you did your Henry Kissinger.
Yeah. And the Yankees also had a lot of Italian players. So it was like ironic because they were actually a working class team, like all over the world, because they had the first Italian players, the Agio Barriers, that kind of stuff. And I know people in Puerto Rico, everywhere you go, you will find Yankee fans. I wore a Yankee shirt in Havana. People stopped me to talk. People have been like climbing Everest and they see Yankee hats, and in Tibet and Nepal and Vietnam and Ecuador, you name it. So everybody knows the sorry. So we're going to talk about some of the main topics dealing with the economics of baseball, right? On the eve of the World Series, right? The values of teams, the wealth of owners. And a really important topic is the public funding, which I think may be the most important thing in this whole thing. Public funding of stadiums and arenas and stuff like that. TV revenue, merchandise sales, just the basic, the cost, obviously the cost of attending games. But before we start, let me just say a little bit of a legal background. Baseball has a unique status, right? Congressionally mandated status, actually. They have something called a reserve clause, which historically bound a player to the same team for his entire career unless that team traded him or released him. That player historically had no say in any of this. You were drafted, you couldn't sign. The draft wasn't until 1965, I believe. So you could basically sign, which meant teams like the Yankees go around. Teams like the Yankees could go around, or the Brooklyn Dodgers could go around and sign like a lot of really great players because they had the money to do it. So you had this reserve clause. The reserve clause was challenged at various times. In 1922, there was a Supreme Court case called Federal Baseball Club versus the National League, which granted antitrust immunity to Major League Baseball teams because they argued that it was not a business so much as an amusement or an entertainment or an exhibition, right? Something like that. And so it was not subject to the Commerce Clause. But the big moment came, well, a couple of big moments in the 70s. In May of 1970, there was a famous Supreme Court case under the name of Flood v. Koo. And that was Curt Flood and Bowie Koo. Curt Flood was a great baseball player, frequent all-star. He played with the St. Louis Cardinals and won, I think, 2 World Series in the 60s. He went in 64 and
in 67. Oh, no, 67. Yeah, 68.
I actually wrote that. He was a 3-time All-Star, 7 consecutive Gold Gloves. And then in October of 1969, the St. Louis Cardinals, with whom he played his whole career, traded him to the Philadelphia Phillies. He did not consent to it. He had no say in it. He said, so he filed a lawsuit against Major League Baseball. He said, after 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel that I have a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes. Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, denied his request for free agency, naturally, because of the reserve clause. And Flood went to the case that eventually went to the Supreme Court based on antitrust laws, was the 13th Amendment, which barred involuntary servitude, slavery, right? And the Supreme Court ruled against. I believe it was a 6-3 or 5-4 decision. And so the Supreme Court basically upheld the 1922 decision that said that baseball has this reserve clause It's not subject to antitrust laws, or it can't be regulated according to the Commerce Clause. That didn't last long. One of the great labor leaders in 20th century U.S. history, which he doesn't get as much acclaim, was the head of the Players Union, a guy named Marvin Miller. He was a longtime labor lawyer. He became the head of the President's Union. Marvin Miller was a fighter. And in the 70s, the movement against the reserve clause picked up steam. And in 1975, two ball players, Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, I believe, right? Two pitchers, filed a suit, and Major League Baseball consented to arbitration. The arbiter, a guy named Peter Seitz, freed them. He ruled that the reserve clause did not apply. And so once your contract had expired, you were free to join other teams. And that's in many ways the beginning of modern baseball. I think more than anybody, the New York Yankees took advantage of that. Their owner at the time was George Steinbrenner Sr. George Steinbrenner bought the Yankees in 1973 for $10 million. $10 million is going to be one of the great investments of all time. And he's the first person who signed. The two most high-profile free agents at the time were Catfish Hunter, Jim Hunter, and Reggie Jackson. I think Reggie got, 6 years at $3 million or something, like $500,000 a year. 5 years, 6 years, $3 million. 5 years, $3 million. Yeah, it was $600,000 a year. It had only been a few years prior to that when the first player broke the $200,000 a year salary mark. Joe DiMaggio was the first to get $100,000. Basically, the gates were open in 1975, and you have the free agency era. Players are still bound to a team for 6 years, right? For the first 6 years, you're obliged to play for that particular team. You can go to arbitration if you don't like the salary that they're giving you, right? Which is a big issue this year because one of the best free agents ever, a guy named Juan Soto, was going to be a free agent, right? That's the background too, but we're gonna start by just talking about some of these issues. First, I think a lot of these owners like to talk about how difficult it is to run their business, like in capitalists, right? So I think first, let's just talk about how valuable these teams are, right? And like I said, in most cases, when we talk about this stuff, the two teams that we're going to talk about the most are going to be the Yankees and Dodgers, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question of choice.
Forbes magazine has done a lot of stuff on economics and sports. There's a great website called SpotRack, which has a great data on the salaries and values and things like that, Sportico. So there's a lot. So what's the most valuable franchise in America, in baseball?
New York by far. Like they're worth $2 billion more than the Dodgers, which is second.
Yeah.
And then the Dodgers are $1 billion ahead of the Red Sox, which is the third most valuable franchise.
Yes, I think this data is up to date, and a lot of these are estimates, but the Yankee estimate, what is it, like 7 or 8 billion, right? That they're valued at?
So 7.55, according to the recent stats we've been looking at.
If you look at the sales of baseball teams, though, they generally go much higher. Like, I don't understand the economics of the National Football League as much, but the Commanders just sold for $6 billion, which just blew away the previous high by like millions, many billions, right?
Yeah.
If the Yankees are valued at 700 or 7.5 billion, I have seen estimates that on a market, if they were for sale, that they would probably get cat easily, right? It is along with, I think, like Manchester United Soccer and the Dallas Cowboys, like the most valuable franchise, right?
America's team.
They're America's team, right? We're talking about a lot of money, right? The Yankees are worth $7.5 billion. The Dodgers, about $2 billion less. The Red Sox, the big cities, right? The Cubs, the Giants, the Mets, the Phillies, and the Braves. Not a surprising list, right? If you look at it, right? But of course, that doesn't mean that they're only worth that. They're often worth a lot more than that. As we face the World Series here, we're looking at the two wealthiest squads, right? But that also, one of the big things you often hear, especially directed at the Yankees, is they just buy pennants. And people say that about the Dodgers too, because when we get to payrolls, we're going to also see that they're way up there on that as well. But one of the things about baseball is that the team that spends the most doesn't always win the pennant, does it? Some of the most recent winners are, like, the Giants won 3 in 6 years, in 5 years, actually. It's a big market team, but they never had the kind of payroll.
They're middle of the pack in terms of payroll, and historically have been middle of the pack. In the 70s, they were really cheap in terms of payroll, but starting in the 80s, they moved up, but never like crazy. They were always middle of the, and even to the 80s, middle of the top, maybe top third, still not really not nearly at the same level as the Yankees and the Dodgers and Mets.
And we're looking at with the Yankees in their history have won something like 27 pennants.
Yeah.
27 World Series.
Yeah.
The Dodgers have won a good number as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I think the Giants have actually won more though, because they were originally New York teams, right? The New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers. So they shipped it. So they get those records as well. So the Giants, if you're a modern baseball fan, the Giants actually had an amazing run. I don't know what I'm saying, but for the most part, you don't think of the Giants that way, but it's actually like one of the more successful franchises. And the Giants in this recent thing were $3.8 billion, which is not bad. They're actually worth more than the Mets, which I find really surprising. But you have like in 2015, the Kansas City Royals won the World Series, which is hardly a big market or a wealthy team, right?
Weren't they in the bottom three of most value in the
Probably
in the stats that you've been sharing?
So this is more or less current. It values them. It estimates they're worth about $1.2 billion, right? The only teams below them, which if you understand baseball, is no surprise, would be the Miami Marlins and the Oakland A's. We're talking about the Oakland A's. And I know both of you, Clayton knows a good deal, and you live there. And so you see what that really means. Keep in mind, these teams have great support. They're really important in the community. We have this big gap, like the Cleveland Guardians, who the Yankees beat to make the World Series, are only estimated to be worth $1.35 billion. These teams only, right? But these teams are incredibly valuable. And if you look, and I didn't do this, but if you look at the sale prices compared to what they were purchased for, it's huge, right? Obviously, the most obvious example was the Yankees, who was 15 years now, but they were purchased at $10 million. And they were owned at the time by CBS, the network, on the Yankees. Yeah.
So the value, that's benefiting the owners, which is in the case of the Yankees is the Steinbrenner family, but are they also publicly traded, or do they have shareholders, et cetera?
There was teams of partners, but not publicly
They're
traded.
not publicly traded. I think the only pro sports team like that is the Green Bay Packers, right? Which is not even.
And even that's not really publicly traded. It's more a matter of it's publicly owned by the city, by Green Bay.
Yeah.
You can't just be on Clayton Lust in Houston. I'd like to buy a couple of shares of Green Bay Packers stock.
Yeah.
Bob would probably own a bunch of shares of the New York Yankees if they were publicly traded.
What they would be worth. But we're all looking at kind of the same data on the value of professional sports teams, right? Compared to General Electric or General Motors or Amazon or Apple, usually. But if you look in the world of sports, this is an immense amount of money, right? But it doesn't guarantee success, either the Yankees. And that's one of the things that I think is important. Like when you talk about the Yankees buy pennants, right? So they haven't won a pennant since 2009. This is the first year. 15 years in Yankee years is an eternity, right?
It's literally the longest drought in Yankee history.
The 2010s were the first decade ever that the Yankees did not go to a World Series, right? And so they're back this year. Whereas teams like the Giants, which are a big market team, but still nowhere near New York or LA, the Kansas City Royals, the Cubs won a pennant. Houston, which is a big market team, but not really like that. The Atlanta Braves won a pennant. The Washington Nationals have won a pennant, right? So the Texas Rangers last year won a pennant, right? In Arlington, right?
But I would like to point out that with that, while they are quote unquote they might be a mid-market team, they also spent nearly $1 billion on free agent contracts to do that. I mean, if you want to talk about buying many, that's what buying a pennant actually looks like.
And the thing that's interesting there is because a lot of these teams will say, like, we can't afford to bid for free agents. Right? You just don't want to. If you're at billions of dollars, you could afford to bid the free agents, right? And the thing that's interesting, I think, about these numbers, because the Rangers are listed at a $2.4 billion value. If I don't know, George Bush used to own the Rangers. I think the current owners bought it from him, didn't they?
The current owners bought. There was a guy who owned a cable company, and I can't remember his name, that Bush sold to. I can't remember his name, but he ran out. He basically was on the verge of running out of money and going bankrupt, and that's why he wound up selling. But yeah, he's not. Yeah, this is I think the third or fourth iteration of ownership after George Bush.
Okay. So they're valued at $2.4 billion. If the Rangers were on sale tomorrow, what would they get? They would get more than $2.4 billion.
Oh, sure. Of course they could. You could probably get, and especially with the new stadium they have, you could probably, I would imagine they'd get close to $5 at least.
Yeah.
For the Rangers. No question.
Yeah. So basically, the point that we're beating to death here is these teams are worth a lot of money. These are big corporations, which is often what you hear, because sometimes if there's a dispute between a player and a team, the team gets the media to attack them. Oh, they're greedy, they're rich. And the player's response is usually, hey, this is a business, right? And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind when we talk about players, because some players make a huge amount of money, especially in the Dodgers and Yankees, right? Who will have 3 of the biggest contracts ever, hopefully, if Soto resigns, right? So we're talking, these players do make a tremendous amount of money, and some make immense amounts of money, but for the most part, the wealth of these teams is so big that the salaries they pay are not a huge factor in their final and the bottom line, right? And a lot of teams will purposely ditch players before they have to pay them, or even have a losing season. And we'll get to this in a minute, because there's guaranteed income. Whether you win or lose, you're getting paid, which is another story about capitalism, right? Along with the value of the team, the owners of professional baseball teams are very wealthy, right? And again, this starts in New York, but not with the Yankees, right? The most valuable team owner is
Steve Cohen of the New York Mets.
hedge fund guy, right?
That's right.
Estimated at like 25 billion or something like that.
It was something crazy.
Like his personal wealth is valued at like 25 billion. He's a hedge fund developer, owner, whatever. For a guy like Cohen, the cost of operating a baseball team is small.
But it's smart. Yeah. And the other thing is that he does demonstrate precisely, though, because he does actually say, I don't care what the cost is. And this is just baseball. This isn't the finance part, but he just makes a ton of bad decisions because I'll just throw money at. And
last year, he gave 2 pitchers who were both over 40 years old, like 40-some million each, Verlander and Scherzer, right?
It was nuts.
Neither of it was pitched very much since then. They're all hurt because they're big.
And for him, no less. They haven't pitched for him. When they have pitched for somebody else.
Yeah. So Cohen is up there. The Steinbrenners, it's interesting. There are different numbers. Forbes estimates the Steinbrenners walk at $4 billion, which would put them very close to the top. There are other estimates which have it below that, but they are not in terms of personal wealth, because the Steinbrenners basically, they own the Yankees. That's their major.
That's their business.
Their major business. Yeah. The old man owned the shipping company, which he actually got in trouble too because he was making illegal donations to Richard Nixon in the 70s.
Like, incidentally, they're a dying breed in that regard. If they are, in terms of it's the family business, so to speak, because it's just not really. We've gotten out of that period where Disney owned the Dodgers and corporate entities owning these, but it's still people like Cohen. It's people like John Fisher in Oakland, who is his money came from his family owned the Gap. And he's owned a bunch of other stuff and owned the private.
The Cubs.
Cubs were owned by their own. I'm sorry.
They were by the Tribune, but now it's the Ricketts family. Isn't the governor of Nebraska? Isn't the governor of Nebraska named Ricketts, the Republican governor of Nebraska?
I don't know.
I think so. I think that's the brother. So the Ricketts, I think, made their money in the beef industry, meat packing or something like that. They own the Cubs. Yeah, because in the old days, it was like the Yankees were owned by, I forget the name, when the Dodgers had Walker O'Malley and Oristona for the Giants. And you knew who the owner was. Bill Vack, one of the most famous people.
The Max.
Hands down. Bill Vack, the only sports owner ever worth a day. Maybe Al Davis a little bit, right? But yeah, those days of a team being associated with a group or a family or a person, like the teams I was following were like that. The Lakers, Jerry Buss, the Raiders, Al Davis, the Yankees, the Steinbrenners. But that is a dying breed.
The Cowboys, Jerry Jones.
Jerry Jones is still there, right? Jones is a gazillionaire in the oil and gas industry too. It'll be interesting if at some point you think the guy will die. I mean, maybe. He may have made a deal with the devil like Kissinger did, but
right.
I'd be curious. I mean, on the open market, what the Cowboys would get would be amazing, right? One thing, I don't follow European soccer leagues, but I know friends who do. Apparently a lot of those teams in the European League were bought by Saudi companies and like Kuwaiti Emirates and things like that. And that hasn't come to Major League Baseball yet. I don't think there are any, I don't know if it's a law or a rule or not, but I think they're mostly American owned.
Yeah. It's straight. Nintendo used to own the Mariners.
The Mariners, yeah.
And that was, I remember when that happened, I was like, I didn't know any of this other stuff. I was much younger. And I remember I was like, oh, cool. Nintendo owns a baseball team now. But I remember people just talking about New York, calling into WFAN and just flipping out. And they hated the Mariners, but they were all like, we can't let a Japanese company own an American baseball team. But yeah, we also do tiny little patches for advertisements on Major League uniforms. We don't have Etihad or Emirates Airline on a big thing on the uniforms yet either.
That's actually, when I mentioned the words national pastime, I forgot. That was actually one of the points in the Supreme Court in the flood case. Who was it? I think Harry Blackman may have written the decision, but he said, this is America's national pastime. It's not a business. Right? Wonderful. You can be worth billions and exempt from all of these antitrust laws. Right. And the reserve clause, parts of it have been, but in general, the reserve clause is more or less still in place. Baseball owners still have great control over their players, right? So, unless you're like signed in business to a contract, right? You can leave anytime you want. I could quit tomorrow, but in baseball, you can't. I think aren't there limitations? Like if a player would want to go play in like Japan or Korea.
Oh yeah, you can't do that. No, you can't do that.
Right. These owners, like the owner of the Braves is worth over $6 billion. The Washington Nationals, over $6 billion. The owner of the Giants, Charles Johnson, I don't know what his
he was like an investor. Looking at some of these, I looked up some of these. Some of them, John Malone was like a CEO of a telecommunications company. William DeWitt, who owns the St. Louis Cardinals, had owned a bunch of Arby's and oil and gas and things like that. They're all basically, it's almost like they partially buy these teams. Basically, it's their new hobby because they're billionaires.
In fact,
I would say that's not the case with the Steinbrenners. It's like a family business, but a lot of the rest of these people.
Oh yeah,
looking at the graph you shared of the wealthiest owners of Major League Baseball, they're all wealthy people, and this is their plaything.
Yeah, I think the Illiches, the Detroit Tigers, aren't they the Little Caesars? Or
it's Little Caesars.
And don't they own like the hockey team too?
Yeah, the Red Wings. Yeah, they own the Red Wings as well.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Some of these people own multi-teams. I guess I don't follow these other sports as much as baseball.
And it's interesting because there's a part of me, I shouldn't say there's a part of me that thinks this. I truly believe this, that it really is a matter of once you've gotten to the trough once with the public funding, there's a whole other way and a whole other reason to go and try it again. Because if you can buy in, if you can leverage something, you can leverage one team to buy another team and know you're going to get a bunch of public money in the process. Why wouldn't you do that? The A's are and I know I'm jumping ahead on this one, but the A's are a great example on this. They are planning in Vegas when they move or whenever this gets done, they stand to get $180 million in transferable tax credits. And my thought is, why wouldn't you take that kind of a deal? Because you can literally take a transferable tax credit. You can literally take that and sell it to anybody you want. Okay. So John Fisher could just literally turn around tomorrow and just $180 million in his pocket, just like that.
Yeah. It's just invented. They just invented it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't do that to podcasts.
Nobody's ever offered me that sort of a transferable tax credit to come and teach class. I wish they did.
Who the hell sat around and invented that you could actually sell a tax credit? It's like pollution credits and things like that. Petroleum and market.
The carbon markets.
Carbon market. They can, but the point here is we're talking about years ago, there was a players lockout, right? And basically it was, and it's hard to get people worked up about sports because you're talking about billionaires versus millionaires, right? We're not talking about working class or people, right? So it's hard to get people worked up that this is actually a labor issue because it's hard to have any sympathy for the guys who play for the New York Yankees, right? With the money they make and everything else. But I think it's important to understand that these owners, this isn't like Amazon or a Boeing who have to go on strike, whatever. These guys are very well off. And essentially what they want is a bigger distribution of the revenue. So we're talking about teams that are valued at an immense amount of money. Many of them are probably the more successful franchises, but not always, right? You have the Guardians, the Tigers made the playoffs each year. The Royals, they're all in like the bottom 8, I think, in terms of major league value, right? The owners are very wealthy. Mentioning the Guardians, because I'm going to talk about that just for a minute. The Guardians generally ditch their best players. They had a great shortstop, Francisco Lindor, who they let go. They traded him to the Mets, and they had some pitchers who they let go. And essentially, they pour mouth, because I'm from that area. Like, I grew up going to Cleveland games all the time, and they pour mouth people, and they're always talking to their fans about how broke they are. The Guardians owner is in like the top 5, I believe, in terms of personal wealth, right? The Dolan family, I think that they're related to the people on the New York Knicks too, aren't they? I think it's the same, not the same specific people, but I think they're related. But the Dolan family, going to Guardians, is worth $4.6 billion. They're in the top 5. Their personal wealth is estimated to be higher than the Steinbrenner's. And yet they get rid of their best players because they don't want to pay them, and they pour mouth all the time. They're always pour mouthing the fans. We can't afford this. We have to let these people go. And generally, baseball fans, they may not be pro-owner, but in general, you're not going to find most baseball fans being sympathetic to players who want more money, right? This is America, right? We're against people we're not against owners who get rich. We're against so-called labor. It's like baseball players, labor, who get rich, right? So they're very wealthy, and there's a couple of things that play there, which I think is really important. Not only are they wealthy because they're selling a product that's in high demand, but they're also being subsidized. They're being subsidized both privately and publicly. So 2 things that I think are really important is the revenue they get, especially TV revenue, and the public funding they get, which especially goes towards stadiums, right? Yeah. There's been a lot of good stuff on this. A lot of people have studied it. It's a great way to teach about the economy, to teach about capitalism. When I start my class, I talk about sport, right? I think all of us have read some stuff on public funding, right, of stadiums. So let's just talk about that a little bit. What kind of stands out? Like, what examples or what teams or what cities or how much money was spent on funding, building these stadiums for private businesses?
Obviously, we're right now, 2 of us are in Houston, and that was obviously public funding, with a ton of public funding spent to build Minute Maid Park.
At the time.
And in Ron Stadium. Never forget those days. But yeah, a ton of public money was spent there. Same with the Rangers ballpark. And the other thing that is really remarkable about this is how many times a team can go back to the well on these sorts of things. In my lifetime, I'm not going to say how old I am, but in my lifetime, the Atlanta Braves have played in Fulton County Stadium, Turner Field, which is now, what's it called? It's named after a bank. You can't remember.
Trust, isn't it?
Yeah. Or Globe Life. And so they've played in 3 stadiums, and they continue to get public funding every single time, including just not only the money for a lot of land for the stadium, or a lot of money for the stadium, like literal money to build the stadium. But they also, this is the big one, is the tax credits that they get. They'll get a tax credit for doing something like creating a massive mixed use space where you can have high rises and retail shopping and parks and stuff like that. But in order to do it, there was a great video capture of it, a time-lapse video capture of what, in order to build Globe Life Stadium, what Atlanta did to just literally just destroy an entire green area to build this baseball stadium, and say, oh no, we're also going to have parks in it too. There was literally a park right there, and it's just bulldozed to do all of that.
When they were building Cop City, that's what I thought of, because they did the same thing at Cop City. They just destroyed this. And these were done with
the same place. Cop City's Atlanta. So.
Yeah. Were you already in San Francisco when Oracle, because San Francisco's got an iconic ballpark, Candlestick, right?
You're on mute.
Oracle was built in 2000, which was about 6 years. But Oracle actually has the rare honor of actually the public funds did not build it. It was actually built by the owner of the Giants at the time, which was Peter Magawan, who had actually been the CEO of Safeway. Yeah. The Giants have received public assistance, including like a $10 million tax break and $80 million for local infrastructure upgrades. But the $360 million roughly that they spent to build it was out of the owner's pocket, which is, I think, quite an interesting and unique thing. I think it's actually the first one not to be built with public funds since the early 60s.
Probably. And 360 million is cheap, man, compared to now too.
It also probably would not cost that much in 2024 in San Francisco.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's, I've had a two game with you like several years ago. It's an amazing ballpark. It has, the food is incredible. It has like crab cakes and lobster, you name it. These is no longer got me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. You're going there for a
So it's very good.
Well, we should talk about something, but I found an article which talked about the history of this. In 1968, talking about Houston again, when the Astrodome was built, there was less than $100,000 in public money spent on the Astrodome, which at the time was the eighth wonder of the world. They never built anything like that. And I forget what year Safeco Field in Seattle was built, but that included, because they're not in Safeco now. Isn't there another one beyond Safeco? It's like about they.
No, they just changed the name.
They just changed the name. It's
level plate now.
Oh, okay. Naming rights. What was the first stadium to do that? Was it Enron? They used to be like,
There was one before.
Stadium. What?
I feel like there was one before, but this Enron's the first one that I really.
And I forget what they get for the naming rights as well. But Safeco, I don't know what year, there was $372 million in public money. And the one that got me, because I used to live in the DC area, 2008, the Nationals, who got a team that left Montreal a few years earlier, and they were playing at RFK Stadium, old RFK Stadium, and then they built a new stadium. $611 million in public money. The football stadium, I believe, was more than that even, right? Yeah. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., the schools don't have air conditioning. Some schools do have toilet paper. And they found $611 million for a baseball team owned by the Learners, who, and are the Learners banking too, I think? I believe the Learners.
It was Keep. No, that
is it.
Was it Keep? I don't remember now, but yeah.
But cities now fund somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 80% of these stadiums, right? Some of that is like tax breaks, as you suggest, the tax credits. Some of it is they'll put in new sewage, infrastructure, new roads to make traffic better, right? And of course, the theory behind all this, what the teams always say is, look at the money we're going to bring into the community, right?
Right.
Restaurants nearby are going to make money, and we're going to hire people to sell popcorn and to sell beer and all that. Several studies have been done, all of which have debunked that idea. No study that's not like sponsored by Major League Baseball owners. Any study done by like economists has also said, no, it's not a good investment at all, right?
No, the ruling class always complains about socialism and they're terrified of the Bernie Sanders of the world and AOC or whatever. But the real socialism is what happens for the ruling class. And so I think sports stadiums, baseball or otherwise, are actually, that's the real socialism. Like it's privatized debt for the taxpayers, but it's socialized
debt, private profits.
Yeah. Excuse me.
The owner of the Cleveland Browns, Art Modell, who was just a cheapskate type, really like one of the most despicable owners in sports at the time. But he once, a very famous phrase, he said, basically, we're 28 Republicans who vote socialist in terms of sports. And we're going to get to that now. Like the revenue is an important deal, right? Both the TV and the revenue. The TV revenues are huge. They're immense. The deals, they now have deals with ESPN, with Fox. These are national deals, right? With TBS. I guess that's it in terms of national. NBC and Apple did some games this year too.
Peacock, NBC
and Amazon actually did games as well, right?
Yeah. Apple doesn't. But Apple's partnered with MLB Network. So,
and I think Amazon has some kind of partnership too. But the point is,
all right, Amazon. I'm sorry, Amazon.
But they're getting money from all these runners, right? And we're talking about huge mega contracts, multi-billion-dollar contracts over the course of their lifetimes, right? And this money is shared equal, which means that the revenue is doled out. When it comes to things like TV, national TV, the Yankees and the Pirates get the same cut, right? They're making the same amount of money. And these revenues, these TV deals, I don't know what year this is for, the ones I found, but ESPN was $700 million. I think this is just for 1 year. These are from 2022. Fox, $525 million. TBS, $325 million, right? And the new, so in 2023, that was up to $1.84 billion. So we're talking like nearly $2 billion a year in national money divided by 30 teams. So you do the math. I don't know what that is, right? So there's this immense amount of money, as well as this money going into stadiums, right? You mentioned Las Vegas. They're getting $380 million of public money. Recently, what was the most recent storm? Milton, right? It wiped out the Tropicana Field where the Rays played. I got to believe the Rays owners were thrilled because they've been trying to
They were. Because this is going to literally say it's going to be cheaper to rebuild it because we can't ever use this again. The rookie was for stadium. They'd already approved a new stadium. Now it's like, now we have to do it. No, there's no wiggle room for it.
I think they asked for $400 million. I got to believe they're going back for double that. All right. The roof was torn up. It's the worst stadium in baseball. Like the ball hit the roof. They have rules for balls that hit the roof there.
And you know, there's something funny about the connection to the Giants' former owner. It was literally built to entice the Giants to move to Tampa Bay.
Really?
Yeah. And then Tampa Bay originally it was built because the White Sox said we might move. So they said, we'll build you a stadium. Well, the White Sox said, no, thanks. And then they were like that close to getting the Giants to move. And then the Giants also said, no, thanks. And that's when I think that's when Mega bought the Giants. It was right on the right.
And it's also the way they hold cities hostage, right?
Absolutely.
Do this. It's like Amazon does that, right? Unless if you form a union, BMW, what was that in Chattanooga, right? If you form a union, we're going to leave. And baseball teams do this all the time. Bud Adams did it in Houston with the Oilers, right?
The ugly thing about the Astros too, the Astros did it as well. The Astros owner at the time was John McMullen, and he was just on the verge of selling.
Was he one of Steinbrenner's partners when they bought the?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And he continually threatened to move the Astros. And then he was the one who sold to Drayton McLean. And Drayton McLean actually said, if you don't build me a new stadium, I'm going to take the deal to move to Northern Virginia. And the only reason that didn't happen was because the Baltimore Orioles stepped in and said, they literally said, this is our territory. You can't move team.
Yeah.
So it was,
we're talking about public funding.
They did exactly that to get Enron/Minute.
Yeah, they shake you down. Like when Enron, and you weren't still in Houston at the time, Scott, we have actually even done stuff like actions about this, but the first proposal to build a publicly funded stadium was put before the voters and it was rejected, was turned down. And so they just went back and went to court and essentially they got a new vote. And they kept doing that until they won. I think there were 3 votes in all. I'm not sure, but I know the first time it was rejected. I think there may have actually been a second as well. I just noticed not only is it a Yankee shirt, but it's a Nike shirt, right? This is essentially a T-shirt with what this cost me? $50. It's a $50 T-shirt.
And it was probably made in Bangladesh.
Didn't you say your Giants hat right there?
Branding.
Where was it made? What's it, $30, $35? The labor costs are probably like 10 cents.
Yeah, and there's transportation costs from Vietnam, whatever that is.
Oh, that's more than any of the labor costs, right?
Yeah.
And Wisconsin, actually, I think it's just appropriated something like $500 million for the Brewers' new stadium. But we don't want to spend too much time on this, although I think it's fun. It's fascinating. One of the kind of great counterexamples of this, though, was in Kansas City. There was recently a vote trying to take advantage of the way that the Chiefs have been winning Super Bowls and everything to build, I believe, 2 new stadiums, right? Both football and baseball. The voters rejected it, which is, and so I'm curious to see in the long run, they're going to get it somehow. They're either going to threaten to leave, they're going to have a new vote, they're going to shake down politicians, something's going to happen. But when you go to people, taxpayers about this, they're not that thrilled. They may be huge sports fans. Like the Browns programmed their Nike and the NFL to build a new stadium that all of Northeastern Ohio would pay for. Basically, they said, those Northeast Ohio teams, whether you're in Cleveland or you're in Youngstown or you're in Warren, we're all going to pay for it, which didn't go over very well, right?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting how there's a mass psychology around sports, right? Where people are more into sports than politics or anything like that. And how the owners are trying to take advantage of that. You're a Kansas City Chiefs fan and we're going to build you a new stadium, except we're not, the we is the bigger we, and it's the taxpayers. And the voters were smart enough to figure that out. And despite being like fanatical football fans, rejected it.
Yeah. In Houston, I know there were 2 votes. There may have been 3. And the stadium downtown, originally Enron Stadium, I think much of that came from new taxes put on things like hotels, bars, taxi cabs, transportation, things,
rental cars. And so they sold, I remember that one. And they literally sold it as yeah, it's public money, but you guys aren't going to pay it because, this is going to hit tourists, not you guys.
Yeah.
Because I've never rented a car the whole time I've lived in Houston. So I don't go to bars or anything. So
Yeah, but plenty of people do, right? And plenty of people stay in hotels.
Make me joke. Don't go to.
So there's a significant amount of public money, huge amounts of public money put into all of these, right? Yankee Stadium was refurbished, and then they built a new one that opened in 2009. And I think there was over $1 billion in public money given to the Steinbrenners. Now, the Steinbrenners can't credibly threaten to leave New York. No, everyone knows they're not going to do that, right? But they were able to use their clout. Giuliani would have been mayor in 2009. No, it would have been.
It was Little Mikey.
Yeah, okay. One billionaire goes to another billionaire and says, hey, we need money for a stadium. I can't imagine that you could say no to the Yankees in New York. I don't think there's anything they could do that would they're just such a cash cow. And I went to a game this summer, first time ever, I'd ever been to Yankee Stadium. My friend and I, he bought really good seats. Luckily, he paid for them, thanks Pete. But we spent combined over $1,000, maybe $1,200 on seats, transportation to get to the game. My Yankees, I have an Aaron Judge jersey in the other room that I spent $200 on. Beers were $17 for a can of beer. Sandwiches are $25, right? So there's a huge amount of public money involved in that. I know we can't keep talking at this, but to speed it up a little bit, local TV deals, we mentioned private TV or national TV deals like ESPN, but locally teams have their own deals too, right?
The regional sports network.
The regional sports network, and which has been, I don't know that a lot of them are actually in crisis right now. You have the Diamond Sports Network, Valley Sports, but at any rate, so just like the Angels, who are an LA team, make $145 million a year just from that. The Astros, $75 million a year. The A's, the lowly Oakland A's, make $70 million a year.
Yeah. And you know what sucks about that is that their payroll was $60 million. So
I know,
they literally, the regional sports network literally paid for the entire payroll of the Oakland A's.
The Pirates, local TV is about $60 million. Their payroll is about 80. So virtually their entire,
Yes.
Cleveland, their payroll is 106. Their local TV revenue is just a little below that. And of course, the biggest are the Yankees and Dodgers. The Dodgers are 196 million. The Yankees are 143 million. That's just local revenue. The Yankees also own the network that broadcasts their games, the Yes Network, which they bought for $3.5 billion in 2019, really not long ago. And I believe that in the value of the teams that we talked about at the beginning, that's included in it, the value of the media there, right? The long-winded point here is there's a ton of money. These people make a ton of money. There's huge money in merchandise sales, $3 billion a year, which is split between the teams and the Major League Players Association. Not surprisingly, the two teams that sell the most merchandise are the Yankees by a long shot, and the Dodgers. The players who sell the most merchandise are Shohei Ohtani from the Dodgers, Mookie Betts from the Dodgers, Aaron Judge from the Yankees, Juan Soto from the Yankees. If you look at the top 10, in terms of merchandise sales, I'd say about half of it's going to be Dodgers, Yankees, LA, and New York, right? The cost of attending games is immense. On the low end, if you take a family of 4 and you just buy the cheapest tickets available, you're still spending about $450. Average ticket prices for, again, the Yankees and Dodgers are the most expensive, are over $200 each. So yeah, you can find cheaper seats in the bleachers, but, and I've experienced this in Houston, when the Yankees come into town, teams also bump up by 2 or 3-fold the ticket prices, right? So several years ago, the Yankees were in town and I went to a game and stayed. I was up at the third deck far away and I was still paying $60. Those tickets would probably have been $15 for the Tampa Bayers.
And even that sort of stuff, there's another control element, because I remember that one of the things that people used to say at these new stadiums was the ticket prices are absurd, but the amenities are worth it. Like you talked about the food there at Oracle, but the thought was, I'll just go buy a cheap ticket, the cheapest ticket I can, and then I'll just go and I'll eat at these places that are in the stadium. And a lot of stadiums, including, I take that back. I don't want to say that Minute Maid does it for sure, because I don't actually have personal experience about this. But I know a lot of teams are closing off access to some of those places if you don't have the right type of ticket.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't just come in and buy the cheap ticket anymore and go into the ruling place.
I didn't know this when I was there, but the tickets my friend bought entitled us to some kind of special section at Yankee Stadium where they would give you like free popcorn and Cokes, right? Not like nothing good, but like. And in Cleveland, you could buy a specific ticket. They put a band around your wrist where you could get like hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff like that for free, right? But you're paying like $150 for the ticket and you're sitting in the bleachers, right? Yeah. I don't remember what we paid, but when we went to that game in San Francisco, 2018, right? And I just remember spending a lot of money. You cannot leave a stadium without dropping a good chunk of change. Right?
No, it's true. The thing about that stadium too is that you can take the ferry over from the East Bay.
Yeah.
That drops you right off at the stadium, and that's also a chunk of change right there.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're going to park, I think average parking is well over $20 now at most of these places, right?
Yeah.
In terms of revenue, seating and suites is $3.3 billion. National revenue, TV and things like that, is $2.8 billion. Local media, this is collectively for the whole league. Local media, $2.5 billion. Team sponsorships. Oh, we haven't even mentioned Minute Maid Park. The New York Yankees, the traditional Yankees, now have the Nike swoosh on their uniforms, and they have a patch now on their jerseys as well for Star Insurance, which I never heard of. Star Insurance paid the Yankees $250 million over 10 years to have that Star Insurance patch. And all these teams have corporate logos now on their uniform on the field, which is fairly new, right? Another element, which we haven't even talked about this, which is a show into itself, really, would be gambling, right? For years, Major League Baseball, all of sports said, no, we can't gamble. Gambling is bad. Pete Rose not allowed to be in the Hall of Fame. Now you can't watch a baseball game without seeing behind the backstop ads for FanDuel and DraftKings and all that stuff as well. And then even
shows on the network, on MLB Network, there are literal shows dedicated to gambling.
Yeah.
It's part of the, it is literally part of the game.
Oh, yeah. During the game, they'll tell you what the odds are. You can get these odds on Aaron Judge hitting a home run. They're prop bets, everything, you name it. It's nuts, right? Yeah. And they're not specifically getting a cut, but it clearly increases the bottom line because people are more interested in what's going on. If you have a bet on something, you're more likely to be more interested in it. Yeah, here's the thing. The average cost of taking a family to the game, this is just based on buying the cheap tickets and things like that. The Dodgers are $219, the Yankees are $174, and so forth. But the average ticket price, the Dodgers is $209, the Yankees is $186. And again, they're 1 and 2. The World Series this year, because it involves the Yankees and Dodgers, those tickets are the highest they've ever been, up to $2,000. And this is, I'm assuming these are the actual fees, or I don't know if these are like the secondary markets, devastating start. But can you even buy tickets now? It's hard to buy tickets now.
That's the thing. It's hard to, you can't get it without going to the secondary market. No other way around.
Yeah.
And it's hard to give that to the teams. They could also put a stop to that too if they wanted to. There's no doubt about that. They can hold reserve and give it to fans and season ticket holders, but they won't.
No. So to wrap it up, let's go. We're talking tomorrow. The World Series starts. It's the Yankees and the Dodgers, like I said at the beginning. Even if your team's not in it, you want the Yankees and Dodgers to be in it, right?
Yeah.
And it's obviously the TV. I think Fox is doing the World Series. It's their fantasy, right? It's the biggest matchup you could have, right? So it's going to bring in immense amounts of money. They're hoping it goes to 7 games, obviously, right? And it's ironic, like we said again, despite this, teams claim poverty. The Yankees owner, Hal Steinbrenner, a few years ago, Aaron Judge, who's, I think, the best player in baseball, was a free agent. When the season began, they offered him a contract of about $200 million, which they actually lowballed. He said no. And then he had a historic year and then was lost. They ended up paying him $360 million. And they were complaining the whole time that they don't have any money. Shohei Ohtani was a free agent last year. He signed with the Dodgers. It's a weird contract because it's $70 million a year, but they're only paying him $2 million.
Yeah, it's deferred. It's an average of $70 million a year. The bulk of it is deferred.
Does that count against the
luxury taxes? Good question. I don't know if it counts toward the luxury. It's got it. Yeah, because there'd be no way you could. Yeah. On the other hand, it might be a way to subvert the luxury tax. I don't know.
You'd think, but wouldn't every team do that? Yeah. And then this year, the Yankees, one of the superstar players is Juan Soto, who's only 25 years old. Probably the youngest anybody's ever become like a superstar free agent. And he's about to break the bank. There are estimates that he's going
The
to.
number starts at 6, and it's going to.
It starts at 6. And we're talking either 10 years at 6 or 12 years at 700. We're talking 700 million, nearly $1 billion.
It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day because there was a big, and I know we're under time constraint here, but there was a Sports Illustrated article or Sports Illustrated issue where it was talking about the salaries in baseball and how all these players were now making $2 million, or it might have been $3 million a year, and saying we've now gotten to the point where we're paying people $3 million a year. And it was now it'd be like, you wish you were paying these guys $3 million. It's just escalated and escalated. I don't think we're too far off, honestly, from having $1 billion player. We're just not. It's going to happen.
And when we compare baseball to football and basketball, they're actually the lower paid compared to the football players and the basketball players, correct?
Basketball's high. I don't know what football like for people like Anthony Davis, Jason Tatum. A lot of these NBA guys are now over 60 million a year.
Right.
I don't know what the NFL is like. I would assume Mahomes actually, I think, restructured it. I don't know what Tom Brady's final contract. I don't really follow football, but I know the NBA is it. NFL is the biggest sport. It makes the most money. It has the biggest TV client. It's like the sport. But
and they have a lot of deals where the money is, again, on an average, the salary is enormous, and sometimes it hits the cap, sometimes it doesn't, because Deshaun Watson's cap numbers are $75 million for the next 2 years. On the other hand, not everybody's getting Deshaun Watson money, and those contracts aren't guaranteed. So if a team cuts these guys, it's done. And most of the money, if they cut them by a certain date, most of that money doesn't count against the cap. So they're protected in ways that Major League Baseball isn't, even if
baseball and basketball contracts are guaranteed. Once you sign that deal, unless you like subversive like clause, morals clause or something, right? The Wander Franco, they got to keep paying you no matter what. Like in football, like Deshaun Watson, that was part of the contract. They negotiated that upfront money. $230 million was guaranteed for that may be the worst contract in sports history right there. So it's the point here is it's a national pastime. It's a sport. It is probably, I would argue, the favorite sport among lefties. Lefties have always had a fondness for baseball. The Daily Worker had a very famous sports writer, Lester. Oh my God, I've forgotten his name now. So among lefties, you will find baseball fans. Ironically, a lot of Yankee fans, because the Steinbrenners understand power, right? But it's also a business. And I think like the kind of stuff we did today really tells you a lot about the way capitalist economies work, right? You have these wealthy people. Lester Ronnie, that's it, right? Yeah. You have these wealthy people. They buy, like you said, a lot of these hobby, right? Let me buy a sports team, right? Let me buy the New York Mets. Steve Ballmer, who owns the Los Angeles Clippers in the NBA, was in on the ground floor of, was it Microsoft or Apple? It's Microsoft, right? With Gates, right? He's now the wealthiest owner in the NBA. I don't know about football, but I assume that a lot of bankers are buying football teams and things like that. College sports now has the significant revenues, right? They have NIL, so these players can get paid. So players have agents. You're seeing a far greater corporate influence even at the college level, right? They get subsidized. Their facilities are built with public money. They have revenue from PB contracts from that. It's a great way to understand capitalism. Last thing I want to say is, and another thing, if you really want to try to understand capitalism, when Derek Jeter became a part owner and president of the Miami Marlins, they had a pretty good year the year before. The first thing he did was trade their 3 best players, Giancarlo Stanton, Christian Yelich, and Marcelo Ozuna, right? Because they were collectively making a lot of money. He basically bailed around on salary. He got rid of their assets, right? Because they're getting guaranteed money, right? So you get rid of the cost associated with paying these guys, and you're still getting TV money. You're still getting guaranteed TV money, guaranteed revenue from these various pools, right? Well, who's getting screwed? The fans, right? They're going to see any product on the field. Team's going to suck. Ticket prices don't go down because your team sucks, right?
And those same fans were on the hook for the stadium they just built.
The Yankees get 3 to 4 million fans a year. So for Steinbrenner to pour mouth, it's just utterly insane. Anyway, I wanted to do this. I told you guys about this because I thought it's fun. The World Series comes up and I talk about this a lot. You know, it's America. Everything is political. Everything has a basis in this capitalist society, and why not baseball?
And I wore, in honor of this, I wore the cap of my favorite American team, which is the Wobblies, the IWW.
Absolutely.
Or the Green and Red podcast.
Or the Green and Red podcast. Bob wears Green and Red podcast.
We're ready to take on the Yankees.
Yankee Imperialism.
I'm not going to put it on me.
Yeah, with the World Series here, and it's the hype is amazing. The only thing close to this, I think, was 2016 when it was the Cubs and then Indians, because neither of them had been to the World Series in like a century, right? So that was a big effing deal, right? The Cubs winning the World Series was a big deal. And that's the only thing that compares. But I think if you look at things like ticket prices and money, this one's going to be even bigger. And the irony is these are the two kind of most popular teams in a lot of ways, and no doubt the Yankees. But you can argue they're the two most hated teams as well.
Yeah.
So they're giving it a penance.
Yeah, it was funny. My partner Teresa didn't know this about the Yankees. She said people hate the Yankees. I was like, there was literally a musical written called Damn Yankees.
And as we've learned from this podcast, the two most valuable teams in Major League Baseball.
Right.
With the wealthiest players, Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Garrett Cole, Yoshinobu Moto, the new pitcher for the Dodgers. The Dodgers also have a great marketing. They've been signing a lot of Asian players, Japanese players, because they're on the Pacific Coast. Those Dodger games are being shown live in Japan. I don't know what kind of money they're getting for that, but clearly, and all these sports are going international too. Japan's a big market. They're playing games now in Mexico every year. They're playing games in London, right? The major leagues have offices in Europe to try to gin up support there. They played games in Australia before. You can't go, but it's kind of not allowed. But
I'm sure the fans enjoy it.
Yeah, they do. Anyway, I just thought we'd have some fun, but also there's some good stuff in here that we should be aware of, because it may be a sport. It may seem like fun and amusement, but it's capitalism. It's wealthy guys. It's rich people who are getting taken care of by the state, by other rich people, and they're being subsidized by the state, by us, whether we go to the games and pay these exorbitant prices for tickets and beer, or whether we pay higher taxes to build their stadiums for them. So the true Yankee imperialism was at home as well as in Latin America. Not just Cuba, it's in New York too.
Folks, we've been having the untold story of baseball and capitalism here on the Green and Red podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to us on one of the many audio platforms we're on, please. And if you really like us, go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit the support button, or become a patron at greenandredpodcast.org. Just want to say thanks to Clayton for joining us today, and all of you this weekend, starting this weekend. Enjoy the World Series. Don't be too anxious about other world events going on right now. And we'll talk to you again soon. Make trouble and misbehave.